Good evening and welcome to the West Hartford Public Safety Committee. Today is September 2nd. It's Tuesday and the time is 6:30. And I would just like to take the point of privilege before we begin with the roll call. And I'd like to have a moment of silence for our firefighter, Joseph Mangione, who passed away. So we can just all bow our heads in a moment of silence for his honor. Okay, thank you. And I also would just like to send out my sincere condolences to the family and to the entire family of our firefighters, our the brotherhood and sisterhood, as well as to the entire public safety. I know that this firefighter meant a great deal to all of you, and I feel your loss, and I know that he will be missed. And I pray that he is in a better place and he will have eternal rest. With that said, I see we have the roll call. Megan, will you be doing that?
Sure, I can, unless you wanted to.
No, please proceed. Megan, you may proceed with the roll call unless you're on mute.
Yes, I don't currently have the list in front of me.
Okay. All right. Matt, can we just dispense with that unless I can just read the names on the monitor?
I think that would be fine, Madam Chair. The minute taker will watch the video tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So I'll dispense with that. All right. I also would like to just give a few opening remarks before we proceed with our meeting. This is September, which is about the 6th month, or really the 9th month, if we start from the beginning of the year, experiencing our pandemic, experiencing these unprecedented times. We've just experienced a great deal of turmoil and loss. I believe everybody's feeling it in all industries, all walks of life. And I just want to express that although times are feeling very troubled, many of us are just feeling sorrowful and just wayward and at a loss. It almost feels like we're on a roller coaster and we're going through these highs and these lows and these sharp curves, and we really don't know what's around the corner. But I would just like to offer that there is many more of us that are good and spread love opposed to spread hate and just unkindness, if that's a word. And I would just like to encourage all of us to hold on to that and to reach out to others and just remind them of the importance of life and the importance about being loving and peace peaceful, being peaceful. And as we just begin to experience so much turbulence, just reach out and do something kind for each other and pay it forward. Um, I know it just seems we're in a dark place, but as long as we can hold on to faith and know that there's going to be a light at this tunnel, and the lightness is going to come very soon. We're all in this together. We really are. And public safety, more so than any other committee, any other field or career interest, you're always on the front line, and you always give of yourselves, and you're always looking out for the other guy. And I would just like to encourage you to just hold on to that. And as you do that, uplifting yourselves and uplift each other. And remember self-care, because I know often you keep yourselves last. You do everything for everybody else, and sometimes we burn out that way and we find ourselves getting sick. And so we just have to remember, sometimes we have to take out a few minutes for ourselves, even if it's in our truck or our car. Take 5 minutes and just exhale, or listen to some music or something that's calming. So I just wanted to express that, because I observe people around town, on my job, just in and out of wherever I am. And I know that we are all experiencing tough time, but I just want us to be mindful of, we're all human beings, and we just have to remember that as we go forward. And so with that said, I'll turn it over to our town manager for communications and the July 8th meeting minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's meeting. Madam Chair, I really appreciate your comments at the onset of the meeting as well. Thank you. With respect to communications, we've just provided the minutes to you. They're informational only. The council will need to officially approve them if the council hasn't done so already. But just good information for you to have. With respect to staff reports, I would recommend we ask Chief Priest to lead off, followed by our two assistant police chiefs, and Deputy Mayor Davidoff did ask for a brief discussion on how we're addressing panhandling, and I can do that after all the chiefs speak, Madam Chair. So my recommendation is we go to Chief Priest next.
Chief Priest, you're up.
Thank you both, Greg Priest, Fire Chief. Thank you, Councilor. I'll touch on what you've discussed a minute. In just a moment, I'll present just a couple of items of business on my Public Safety Committee report, which you have attached. We are experiencing a decline in some of our COVID-related incidents, but we have our resources remaining for response, as well as preparedness and reopening. We're continuing to do collaborative efforts in the center. Chief Cincigali has done a remarkable job trying to coordinate some folks getting out there in collaboration with the health department, our police department, to provide an outreach in the center. And as you may be aware, we've included a new bike team as part of that, which is provides a rolling presence and education to folks that are out there. The equipment and the personnel costs associated with that, or emergency protective measures being sought for reimbursement, either through FEMA or coded to our authorized funding. I'm proud to report that our bike team training, we had an in-house instructor, and we were able to recover some of the costs of training our own personnel through working with another agency who paid West Hartford for some of that training. Also, along the lines of COVID, one of the earlier emergency protective measures was to bring a staff member in. Planning and Recovery Officer Jason Urban came in, and we were notified just this morning alone that he was able to secure a $13,000 grant from FEMA, which is to cover personal protective equipment that was procured prior to COVID, but was not eligible. It was procured prior to COVID, used for COVID, but it was done prior to the emergency protective measures funding that was available. So this is an outstanding example of how prior planning and then focused planning and administrative support in the fire department, coupled with assistance from Patty Lewis and Finance, can benefit West Hartford. Moving off of COVID quickly, tropical storm, I won't even purport how to say it, but Isaias was highly impactful to our community. We had over 53% of our power lost. There was widespread destruction through town that included damages to homes, as well as our electrical infrastructure. It was an inordinate amount of calls, over 472 calls for service and 900 calls during the period of the storm. And it required an extensive, unified response between our town manager, our fire department, our police department, our public safety dispatchers, emergency management, deputy emergency manager, our DPW, social services, and others were involved in that as well. It was extended. It was over a week's period of time, and there was certainly a frustration with the timeliness of the response from Eversource. However, the communication with Eversource was fairly good. So notable was the use of our community support service officer, Troy Shipley. He was in his position as a result of our emergency protective measures for COVID, but he came in quite helpful because he had significant engagement with our community who required some assistance, some extra assistance. So his efforts were coordinated with fire department operations, our emergency management, training, and support services. And obviously, Deputy Emergency Manager McHugh helped as well. And we're continuing to work on our after action and FEMA reimbursement. One other notable thing I think we're going to talk of as a new business, but I'll hit it briefly before, is as discussed in our new business, Captain Albert has been able to, one of our captains, sense an opportunity to improve our services. And he successfully organized and obtained a grant from Autotel, who's a drone manufacturer, in partnership with the National Public Safety Drone Donation Program. So we've been blessed to have this added to our stock, and we'll be looking later for your support of obtaining this piece of equipment. It was cleared through Corporation and Risk Council, Corporation Council and Risk Management, and our policy outlines our legal use, documentation, and privacy issues, and the protocol if the PD were allowed to use it as a shared asset. It's about a $1,500 drone. It's fully covered by the grant, and our maintenance and training costs will be covered within our existing budget. And I look forward to the council's support to proceed with a formal acceptance and highlight that. And then just to hit this quickly, the last part of my report, just going to work off a few notes here. I promise I'll be brief, but a little bit of advance forgiveness if I get emotional. So by intention, I reserve speaking on this topic to the end, out of reference for the gravity of the situation, but also because I know my personal capacity is going to be challenged after speaking to this. So as you know, through the communications forwarded through Town Manager Hart, apparatus operator Joe Mangione passed away on August 27th. His last shift actually working in a firehouse was in late July, evidencing the rapid pace of his cancer, but also the dedication to the department. Joe was, by all accounts, an outstanding firefighter and human being who served this town for over 20 years. The correspondence as sent previously outlined his life. That's awesome. Outlined his life and his career in far more detail, and his actual service is recorded on the Malloy Funeral Home website. This afternoon, we buried a man who loved his family, he loved his job, he loved this town, and he gave himself to the West Hartford Fire Department. Without a doubt, there's an emotion and sadness in his loss, personally and professionally for me. However, in this business for a while, I've been able to reconcile that death is part of life, learning acceptance while still feeling loss. So for many of us in public safety, perhaps we're a bit jaded, but periodically there is a sensation that the national reverence and regard for duty has regressed over the years. Unfortunately, we are deeply connected and emotional with this perception, as many of us joined public safety occupations many years ago for reasons closely related to a sense of duty. In our fast-paced society, quick to judge, quick to offer thoughts and prayers, a death likely related to duty is incredibly hard for our chiefs, but for every member of the department. In addition to being an outstanding family man, Joe Mangione performed his duty for the town of West Hartford admirably. And during his illness and after his passing, I watched his brother and sister firefighters live up to every expectation that I had. Apparatus Operator Chapin, Battalion Chief Matthews, Assistant Chief O'Callahan, Union President Ingram, and many others worked countless hours supporting and coordinating. The list of all involved is too long to cover. But over the last few days, I've had numerous outreaches of support from our mayor, our council members from both parties, and the presence of our town manager and council members at the services. Our Human Resources Department, Public Works, and many other departments and department heads reached out. or handled logistics. Chief Riddick's police officers from West Hartford stationed outside his home after his passing, providing comfort to Joe's family. And then on the day of his funeral, stood in the rain to protect the ceremonies and pay respects. Mutual aid departments from across the state covered our town for the funeral while I watched, side by side with the union president, at likely over 100 past and present firefighters from West Hartford soaking after hours in the rain. So my emotions tonight are of sadness for the loss of a firefighter, but of thankfulness for the visible and palpable show of support for the nearly 90 active members of the West Hartford Fire Department and their families who watch them come to work daily to perform their duty while knowing the risks. This town and these department members have made Joe's dedication and commitment all worth it. And most of all, Joe's family saw it and felt it. This provides a great comfort to all of us in the fire department and in our families at home. So on behalf of our fire department and our fire department personnel, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief. We're right there with you, sir. It is a hard day for West Hartford today and this evening and in the days to come. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to each other and hold each other up. So the next on the agenda in terms of staff report is the police department.
Yes, good evening. This is Assistant Chief Dan Coppinger. I'm going to keep our staff report brief, but before I begin, I would just like to say that the men and women of this police department had the privilege today, and now he's going to get me choked up. Chief, you did a good job today. And our hearts go out to you, your staff, your officers, and the men and women of the fire department. I had a few more things to say, but I'll leave it at that. Good job, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
To kind of reiterate a few of the things that the Chief spoke of that's a hot topic for all of us here in town is the COVID-19. And we have 4 officers that are currently out on COVID leave, but this is all precautionary. And we take large precautions here at the PD. Make sure that people are taking time off. For example, if their kids are sick, we just want to make sure that it is not COVID. And so we've been very successful at the PD. We have not had one officer test positive. And I think that has been similar around most of the town of West Hartford. The town of West Hartford has done a great job. And on the police side, what we're seeing are our social distancing complaints have dropped very significantly. This past week, we've only had 4 social distancing complaints, and that's down. Last week, we had about 8 or 9, and they're continuously getting less and less. And this past weekend, for the first time in many months, we had 0 social distancing complaints. Our beat officers have noticed increased compliance in the town center on the wearing of face masks. And as the chief had noted, this is a joint effort between police, fire, and the health department. And it is very noticeable. We're seeing compliance is much greater inside the businesses as well as out on the streets. So we have a lot more to cover this evening, so that concludes my staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Coppinger. Are there any questions? Deputy Mayor Davidoff?
Leon Davidoff. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'd first like to say, Chief Priest, nobody could have expressed the sentiments the way you did. And it was apparent at the wake yesterday, the love that the fellow firefighters, men and women, had for their comrade. And it is a family. And it's no surprise that family it's a work family, but it's lifetime of friendships and working together. And that is so evident in times of joy and in times of sadness. And when I left yesterday, I had the realization, I've always felt this way, that our employees are the best. And the reason they're the best is because they work together, they support each other, and they're there for each other. And it was clearly evident in the fact that members of the police department, as well as the DPW and other town departments, were there to support the family. And going forward, I know that they will be there for those who may need someone to talk to, a shoulder to lean on, an ear to listen. And I think that's what we do well. So I think my colleagues look at the fire department more than just a department that we fund and have expectations of being first responders. I think we know that there's a human element to that. And that was very, very evident yesterday at the wake and through the social media comments of those who had served with him. So it is a sad day today in West Hartford. And it's kind of ironic that we have to have this meeting today. It's a tough day. So our thoughts and prayers are with everyone. And together we will get through this. And the other thing I wanted to say is, because we haven't had a meeting in a while, Tropical Storm Isaias, I think that's how you pronounce it, really showed the other part of why West Hartford's a leading community. Because we had, as was mentioned by, I think by you, Chief, and the manager, everyone working together for a common purpose, and that was to get West Hartford back to the place it was prior to the storm. So kudos to all the departments involved, to the manager for doing an amazing job of coordinating that and passing on those compliments to everyone acting as a team. And I would be remiss if I didn't compliment our mayor, who took the leadership and shown through experience how important it is to communicate with our residents on almost a daily basis as to the status of what's happening. It was very reminiscent of Storm Alfred as to what's happening, and our residents come to expect that during a disaster, their government's going to step up and keep them informed that, listen, we haven't forgotten about you. We're doing everything we can to bring your life back to normal. And Mayor, your voice was so comforting to hear on the end of that phone call. And for many people have said to me, it was accurate information. And I think that's what people expect: accurate and timely information without raising expectations as to when service was going to be provided. It was just, this is how things are going. We're here for you. If we can do any more, let us know. So thank you for your empathy, for your leadership, for your experience. Matt, to all the department heads, please express our appreciation for work well done. And so here's two things just in the first, 20 minutes of this meeting that really exemplify why West Hartford is, in my opinion, the leading community in Connecticut. Strong leadership, strong management, dedicated employees, and everybody's looking out for each other, as you pointed out, Carol, at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Davidoff. And Mayor, I would agree with everything Deputy Mayor said. Fantastic job. That's why West Hartford continues to be a draw for so many people, not only around the country, but around the world. All right, Matt, I believe that you're up next.
I am Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Councillor Fay is trying to dial in, and hopefully she'll be able to join us shortly. And thank you all for your kind remarks and supportive remarks this evening. So 2 items I wanted to touch on quickly. First of all, yesterday, Mayor Cantor and I had an opportunity to participate in a virtual meeting convened by the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, David Lehman, as well as our acting Commissioner of Public Health. And I apologize, Madam Chair, her name just escaped me. Commissioner Gifford, correct?
Yes, Commissioner Deidre Gifford.
Deidre Gifford. So we had the opportunity to attend this meeting, and they convened it because they are looking for feedback from local governments as well as the local health departments and health districts regarding the enforcement of the sector rules that have been established pursuant to the governor's executive orders. So this really was a great opportunity for us all to share our respective experiences. And you had a small number of municipalities and health districts, but they spanned the various geographic areas of the state. And again, it was a very good opportunity for us to express our concern about the enforceability of the executive order on face coverings and how we would appreciate and how we think it would be so beneficial if the state were to add a specific penalty for a violation of that executive order, like a monetary fine. And we cited some examples that we've seen in other states. Another issue that we discussed at some length, some of our neighbors, we've seen it a little bit, but maybe not to the same extent as other municipalities. They're seeing these large private gatherings, parties, and sometimes folks are charging a fee to get into the party. Could feature music, what have you. But anyhow, people there are not complying with the rules on face coverings, social distancing, what have you. So that was just another case in point where we think local governments, as well as the state itself, would benefit if the state were to establish a specific penalty for a violation of that executive order as well. So I just want to cover that. I'm sure Mayor Cantor can add to it at a later point if she wishes. Actually, why don't we do that now? I think it'd be appropriate, Madam Chair, if the mayor could speak to it, and then I'll get to my second item.
Okay. Mayor.
I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble with my feed and audio, and I have a lot of background noise, so I apologize. It's probably, Matt, you did a great job, and I'm going to go on mute. Sorry.
Mayor.
All right, Madam Chair, Matt Hart, Town Manager. I will continue. The second item I wanted to discuss, and I think it's something we should discuss in more detail at our next meeting, maybe listed as an agenda item, is how the town is working to address panhandling. I know a number of you have been contacted. My office, we've received a number of emails and phone calls as well. I'm sure the police department has. I think there's a concern about an uptick in activity. I don't know if we've necessarily seen an uptick, but it appears to be more noticeable. Anyhow, the state of the law around panhandling changed significantly over the last 10 years. There's a well-known U.S. Supreme Court case, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, coming out of a town in the state of Arizona. It's a First Amendment case, and actually the ruling in that case invalidates most of the panhandling ordinances that local governments around the nation have had on the books for decades. So it's a big change in the law that's not well understood, because we often get a call from people, why can't you just establish an ordinance and outlaw that activity? Well, someone standing in the public right of way and asking for money, that is a constitutionally protected activity. The town cannot prohibit that. Now, what can we control? Obviously, that's not permitted on private property without the permission of the property owner. But if someone were to engage in what's called aggressive panhandling, for example, if they were to threaten, if they were to try to intimidate passersby, we often hear stories in that regard, particularly around younger victims, teenage victims who may be walking in parts of town and they're approached by these folks who are, in many cases have some real significant needs. So that type of panhandling is not allowed. And then secondly, if the panhandler were, if he or her were to put themselves in the traveled way and create a hazard to the traveling public. So those are instances where our police can step in and take corrective action. But again, standing in the public right of way with a sign asking passersby for money is not illegal. So how do we try to address it? You know, Chief, and I'll ask the two chiefs to elaborate on my comments in a moment or two. We certainly see this as a human service issue. Again, many of the folks engaging in this activity have some real critical needs. They may be homeless. They may be suffering from a physical or a mental illness, and we want to try to approach it in a compassionate way as well. Some are doing it to earn income. So, you know, the police have worked with our Office of Social Services for some years now in terms of how we can offer services. I think the police officers probably know all of the regular panhandlers in town. You know, they know them by name because they approach them, they have a conversation with them, etc. So we're trying to treat it and handle it in a compassionate way. We do not ignore it. We're trying to be proactive. But the number one thing we would ask members of the public to do is really, and it can be hard, but not to give money to folks who are asking for it. If you want to make a contribution, instead, make a contribution to one of our area shelters or our food bank, either Food Share or our local West Hartford food bank. That really is the best way to handle the situation. And I know it's hard when someone is standing by the side of the road and they're a person in need. So let me pause there, and through you, Madam Chair, ask Chief Coppinger and perhaps Chief Terra to elaborate on my overview.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Who would like to go first?
Madam Chair, Assistant Chief Dan Coppinger, I have a few comments. I'd like to reiterate everything that the town manager just said. As law enforcement, I want everyone to understand in our community that, and as Madam Chair said at the opening of our meeting tonight, you have to be kind and have compassion. And these people who are out panhandling, the majority suffer from either mental illness or addiction. And these are things that are beyond their own control. And so that's where we, as the police, start off, is by having compassion and treating everyone with kindness. And that goes a long way when we're out speaking with the panhandlers. And the town manager is correct. We get to know everyone. We get to know their backgrounds. We get to know where they came from. Some of these individuals do have homes. Some of these individuals do have vehicles that they can use. And some are homeless. We work very closely with social services, almost on a daily basis. I'm in contact with them at least once or twice a week. But the officers through the entire department, usually once a day, there's an officer at some point reaching out to someone in social services, whether it's directly or by forwarding an incident report on a contact with a panhandler or someone who needs assistance. As the town manager said, it is very difficult not to give money when they're asking for money. But one thing that you can do, what the public can do in lieu of giving money, besides donating to a food share or things like that, is offer food to the panhandlers. But also, as the town manager said, there are some out there that are using this as their daily job, where they are making income off of it. Sometimes that money goes towards drugs and alcohol. Sometimes it goes towards food or even essential needs for socks and clothing and such. We do have some plans, and we've been talking about this for quite some time. You have to look back, what changed a year or 2 years ago and created this uptick in panhandling. And the economy has changed. People have lost jobs. So there's a lot of drivers that are increasing the number of panhandlers in town. But we do have some things that we are looking into. In last year, we sent out a group of officers, police officers, and worked with social services in town. And we went out and we identified these panhandlers. We asked them questions. Why are you out here? What can we do? What services do you need? Do you want help? Can we get you help? And quite often the response was no, thank you. We don't need help. And that gets us to go away, but we do know that they do need help. And so we can offer them services. If we find out that they were a veteran, there are veteran services across the state that can help out these individuals. So we will continue to work with social services. It's a topic we're always discussing, and there are some initiatives that we can implement and that will be implemented in the near future. So I can go on and talk about this, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Coppinger. Does anybody have any questions? Assistant Chief Coppinger, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment because many of what everyone has said concerns me as well. But more importantly, when it comes to a public safety issue, and I'm so happy to hear everybody continue to say what you did in terms of don't necessarily give money, give it to the shelters or some of the other organizations, social service organizations around town. My concern is when folks do give money to the panhandlers and you're in a road that has 3 lanes. My concern is often when that panhandler walks into the road or perhaps even runs into the road and you might be in that middle lane or the far right lane. I just envision something happening because the person perhaps may not see them dart out or what have you. And so I would agree with what you're saying in terms of discouraging people from doing that. Often I have to remind my family members who feel, very badly for the individual and just want to do something for them. And I just try to remind them, even though you want to do some good, you're really putting that individual and others at risk in terms of a public safety issue. So I just kind of want to echo that, for other people who are listening in or to drive that message home to other people as well. And I guess we can just kind of continue to figure out some ways to continue to work with these folks because they're hurting. And unfortunately, I just envision more instead of less, as we continue in this pandemic and continue to experience some of the things that we're starting to experience. I was in the mall the other day speaking to a number of employees at Lord & Taylor who are going to be losing their job. They're going to be looking at unemployment. So there's a lot of people hurting out there. And I just think we all need to be mindful of that. We're fortunate that we're still employed and we have our jobs to go to, but there's a number of people who are hurting and anticipating the loss of jobs that they may have already lost loved ones. And it's just really some tough times. So I'll stop talking there, but that was my comment, Assistant Chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, I want to use the scenario that you gave. So if someone does step out into the roadway, that is an infraction where we can approach a panhandler and we can give them a ticket for doing that. Improper use of a highway is what the charge would be. And I also want the community to know that the overwhelming majority of our panhandlers are not from West Hartford. They're from out of the town. As far away, we've had panhandlers come down from Massachusetts, and as far south is the shoreline of Connecticut. So we get a very wide variety of people coming up into the town of West Hartford. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Assistant Chief Coppinger, for the overview. I would say, though, on my daily commute, I probably pass the exact same 8 to 10 individuals at the exact same locations, or maybe they switch it up with somebody else in the group, but the locations are the same ones. And I would say on a daily basis, I do see people entering the roadway to, get whatever somebody's donating to them. And our police can't be everywhere. So there's got to be some type of middle ground with compassion and for keeping these individuals safe, because the worst thing that could happen is some innocent motorist strikes one of these people while they're getting a donation from a Good Samaritan. And that would be a very terrible outcome, and it would be very devastating for the person who hit them. And I agree that our approach needs to be one of compassion, that's and kindness, and that's what we talked about. But I don't know. It's sometimes it sort of feels frustrating that somebody could be out there 7 days a week, on the same corner doing the exact same thing. It's not as though they're on a sidewalk where pedestrians are walking by and they're giving them money. It's basically right next to the roadway where there's a long traffic light necessitating works to their advantage in terms of being able to get a donation from a very generous person. But and it's just not unique to West Hartford. If we go up to the mall area, you see it right off of Route 9 and right up off of 84. So I would say in the last 2 years, it has gotten worse. And I agree that the best thing we do is to offer assistance through some other charitable ways and to find more social service programs to meet these needs. I know there was a success story. There was a veteran that was at the corner of Charlesbrook and Farmington that we were able to assist him and get him some help for housing and for other things. But some of these people are on the younger age spectrum, on the spectrum of the younger age people, and they could have some addiction or dependent issues with drugs. So I don't know, whatever we can do to find that connection, to make that link so that they have a better opportunity other than spending their day on a West Hartford street corner. I would just encourage us to keep going forward, because I think we can make some strides. We just can't give up, and it's never good to give up on people. So it sort of torn between the two things, because we all strive to be this magnificent town and everything's hunky-dory. But what it does point out is there are people who are suffering, who are left behind, who are unable to provide for themselves. But I do know that there are resources available, and we just need to double our efforts. And I know it's difficult during this pandemic, and we don't really have like a lot of extra resources to do that. But maybe that's the answer. I don't know. Maybe smarter people than I know the solution. But I think it's important that we realize that it is a situation that does need addressing, and that it be done with compassion, with kindness. So thank you for listening.
Madam Chair, it's Chief Coppinger again. If I could just make one more comment.
Yes. Okay, go ahead,
I
Assistant
want to recognize social services. We're getting ready for another round of going out and doing a concerted effort to speak with the panhandlers around town. And social services is updating what they call CARES cards. They're the West Hartford CARES cards. And they're cards that have phone numbers and information for contacts. And it is a way where we can hand something to a panhandler with information on it, and it kind of just gives us a way to begin a conversation with them and share some information and let them know, hey, we're here to help. We're not here to harass you or do anything along those lines. We want you to be safe. We want to try and get you some help. And so that next round will be coming out in the near future as soon as those cards come in. And I think we're Astrid Calderon said she's getting a few hundred or maybe even like 1,000 of them. It's a big number, but we will be out there handing those out. And we will be asking and working with social services to do that with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Chief. That was going to be my question, if there were any staff that act like either community worker, health worker, or case manager. So that's exactly what you were discussing. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, any other questions? If not, Matt, I believe you're up next in terms of the business items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager, and I'll facilitate these 3 items through you, calling on various staff members. The first one, Chief Priest touched on during his report. The fire department has received a gracious donation of an unmanned aerial vehicle, otherwise known as a drone. And the department has developed a policy regarding its use. We know that sometimes people, for good reason, have concerns about the privacy implications of a municipality's use of a drone. So, you know, before we go ahead and accept this, and we're not looking for a vote from you, we just want to have an opportunity to quickly review the policy, take any questions you have, hear any concerns you might have. If you're in a good place, we'll move forward. So through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Chief Priest to speak to this quickly.
Thank you for the setup. I appreciate it. I hit it at a fairly high level before. I can touch again. You know, we do believe that there is a valid departmental use for the drone training, search and rescue. The latest tropical storm that we had, it would have been helpful to have a damage assessment from an overhead view. As a matter of fact, as part of our storm response, we actually got a drone through a mutual aid agreement. I believe it was the police department, so it helped us with some of that. And then we have some official community outreach and public relations that we feel we can do a good job with the drone. We've addressed who our permitted operators are. We've addressed their operational guidelines to make sure that they comply with the FAA guidance. And we've also instructed them in some of the privacy issues about where we store the data and for either incidents or training. And then more specifically, we don't allow it to be flown over private property unless it's part of an incident response. And any of the other public properties that we would do, we would make sure that we are notifying our my peer directors, or just making sure that it's being done in an official capacity. So it's not a toy, it has an official business use. Again, the donation itself has been cleared by our corporation counsel. We've had risk look at it. We have the appropriate insurance in place. We have some members trained a bit. We believe that we can, after accepting the drone, we would be able to fund the training and the maintenance of it through our existing budget without any budget increases. And beyond that, I would be glad to take any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Chief. Does anybody have any questions?
Madam Chair, Matt Hart, Town Manager, I would just ask the Chief to very quickly speak to the privacy elements and how we're going to handle and store the information, Chief.
So the information would come immediately off of the drone onto one of the fire department's shared servers. It's maintained by the town, that's backed up. It's I don't believe encrypted is the right term, but it's secure behind the fire department's firewall. If it's part of an incident, it will be secured with the incident record, which means that it won't be released, except there's a certain set of parameters for when we release information about incidents. And if anything of a sensitive or private or confidential nature or criminal nature is determined, anything would be directed to my office for review so that we can appropriately dispose of or route it is probably a better way. Does that address everything, sir? Or would you like
Thank you, Mr. Hart, and thank you, Chief Priest. I just have one quick question. I'll be really brief. How will you evaluate the effectiveness of the drone once it's, in use?
Well, I think as far as the evaluating the effectiveness is we need to look at the situations for what we are pressing it into use for, and then we have to determine whether or not we gain new information or better information. I'm very confident in our ability to do what we call an after action report, which we employ frequently for many incidents, which is where we look back on how things went. And my way of evaluating the effectiveness of the drone is through the after action report process. And then obviously, like many things in your municipality, we listen for whether or not there's any feedback from our elected officials, our stakeholders, our town staff, and most importantly, our citizens, if there's any questions, concerns, or complaints. And then we also receive feedback from our members as well about the effectiveness of our tools that we have on any of our apparatus.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Matt, we can move on to the next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Next, we would like to review very important piece of legislation that was recently approved by the Connecticut General Assembly. It was introduced as House Bill 6004, an act concerning police accountability. Assistant Chief Terra has prepared a very nice summary, which we're going to begin to share on your screen in a moment. And Chief Terra will make a concise presentation regarding the main components of the new law, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So through you, Madam Chair, I would turn to Chief Terra next.
Chief Terra, you have it.
Assistant Chief Lawrence Terra here. This is something that started out, the bill is actually 92 pages long. So we try to reduce it down to just 6 for brevity and to actually just identify the specific things that we have to deal with. So it's Public Act 20-1. It came out of the special session, and it has to do with an act concerning police accountability. I think we all would agree at this point that change and some reform was needed based on what we're seeing going on across the nation. The problem that a lot of agencies are facing right now, the police departments, is that this process went so quickly that some of the sections of the bill needs to be fleshed out for our application on our level. So that's some of the things that we're trying to look at right now. A lot of authority was given to the Police Officer Standards and Training Council, which is our governing entity in Connecticut, and our certification comes from them for the police department and for the police officers. So they are basically, they control whether we are employed or not as a police officer. As I said, Police Officer Standards and Training Council, they are the oversight entity, and they were given 9 specific. I'm sorry if you couldn't hear me. They were given 9 specific circumstances where they could either cancel, revoke, or suspend our certification as a police officer. And they're before you. They should be up there on the form right now. It's A through I, but I want to point out 3 of them that are very important. Letter E, the certificate holder was found not guilty of a felony by reason of mental disease or defect. So even if a police officer is charged with something and they're found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, their certification could be revoked. As well as item H, the holder has been found to engage in conduct that undermines the public confidence. Now, as you can see, H is very broad, and we are waiting for direction from the post council as to what that actually means. Those are one of the things that has to be fleshed out so that we understand when an officer, whatever it is that they're referring to, how we can gauge whether it meets H or not, or a revocation or suspension. I, the holder has been found by a law enforcement unit to have used physical force on another person in a manner found not to be justifiable. So that throws it back on the police department. Basically, an internal investigation is conducted, and the police department feels or finds that the force used by one of their own in a manner is not justifiable, that will affect their certification through post council. So again, we're waiting for a little bit of clarification from post council as they've been given the authority through this bill. That was taken. Went into effect upon passage, which was July 31st. The next thing that went on into effect upon passage was drug testing. Currently, the only time we do drug testing here is when someone is hired or if there's cause to believe that we need to do that. The post requirement, what happens is with our certifications, we're renewed every 3 years. So every 3 years, we have to do so much training, and then they renew our certification. However, this new part of the bill requires that we go through a drug screening to include anabolic steroids, which is something new added to this. I reached out to our HR department to find out exactly what the cost is. They're looking to our vendor to find out because typically we don't screen for steroids. Looking at what the DOT goes through for their personnel, it's about $250 per test, and then you add another $200 for steroid tests. So we're looking at about $450 every 3 years for each police officer in the agency to be recertified. The next section, upon passage, again, this went into effect, was implicit bias training. I just wanted to cover that we have, in fact, been doing this here in West Hartford. We provide fair and impartial training along with bias training once every 3 years. We break it up. So 1 year we would teach one, and then the following year we would teach the other to reach our minimum requirements through post. The implicit bias training will be added to the cultural competency, sensitivity, and bias training that officers already received. So they want to increase the number of hours that we get trained, which is not a bad thing. And again, we've been doing it here in West Hartford, so we're going to continue, and we're going to ramp it up a little bit based on the bill. The next thing is crowd management training and statewide policy. Prior to this bill, there was no statewide policy on how to address large crowds that are gathering peacefully. This has come to the forefront with all of the demonstrations we've had around the nation and throughout the state. So the post council has to come up. They've been mandated to come up with a statewide policy that all police departments will have in place. And this is to protect citizens' rights to collectively gather, to protest peacefully, and so on. So this is due to they have to develop this and get it out to all the PDs. The next thing is reporting on recruiting, retaining, and promoting minority police officers. This was effective upon passage again in July 31st. This has actually been in effect since 2015. And I know here in West Hartford that the chief and the department has been actively pursuing candidates, to increase the makeup of the PD to reflect the community that we serve. There are many other programs that they give a couple examples here: Explore programs, community outreach. Here in West Hartford, we have actually been doing a lot of this, and Assistant Chief Coppinger can explain some of the different processes that we use in programs.
Right, and just real quick to assist those who were watching the screen, if we could advance what everyone is seeing on the screen to the next page.
Thank you. Some of the programs that we use for community outreach and
right.
And recruit.
So one of the things with this new bill, it posts some initiatives that can be begun. And one of the things in West Hartford, we've been doing many of these initiatives for quite some time now, going back into the 90s and even before then. So we have things like our College Police Academy, our Citizens Academy. We've done things such as Coffee with the Chief, Coffee or Meet Your Beat Officer, all kinds of things. And just to name a few, I could go down a very long list. So these are also very important. It's important to have school resource officers in the schools because that is one of the best ways. It's one of the earliest ways to contact the citizens in our community, get the kids to know police officers. And it is also a way to start recruiting police officers at a very young age. You know, they use their SROs as mentors. We've had some outstanding SROs here in West Hartford. Some of them over the years have been selected as police officer of the year. So those are just a few things in regards to recruiting, retaining, and promoting.
Thank you. Also, that initiative, annually, we have to report back to the post council as to our efforts and our successes throughout the year. Next thing is the post, based on the bill, there's a police accountability and transparency task force, which I think is very important. What it does is it constitutes a task force to look at this bill and to look at some of the things that we're doing right now, and maybe look into some other things that they might want to suggest for the future. In this bill, they're considering the feasibility of police officers to have professional liability insurance, so they're looking into that. But this transparency task force has to report back to the legislature about many aspects of this bill. Civilian review boards here in West Hartford, there's been one in place for quite a while. This bill actually empowers those towns that have not had one before to develop one. We are, like I said, we're lucky that we've had one here, and clearly ours can be improved in many ways. But we are at the forefront, as many of you have discussed earlier, that West Hartford's a leader, and we are to that effect. The policy, the review, the Civilian Review Board, that went to effect on passage on July 31st, and basically it says that we have to pass an ordinance to involve the scope, number of members, process of selection, terms of office, procedure for filling vacancies, and so on, which will be addressed later. Feasibility and impact of social workers responding to police calls for service. This has been a big draw, and I know that Assistant Chief Coppinger has been working on this, and I'll let him discuss that a little bit.
Sure. So kind of along the lines of what we were talking about with and dealing with our panhandlers, we work very close with our social services department, and police officers are part of many different committees or task force within the town of West Hartford. For example, we have police officers who sit on the Safe Homes Task Force, which is composed of social services and other different departments in town. We have our code enforcement committee, and the police department works with our zoning officials and engineering. And there's so many different aspects of the job that police officers do that overlaps into other different departments. And this is nothing new. It's been going on as long as I've been a police officer. This was going on before, goes back to the 60s even. So really, the town of West Hartford, we've been staying well ahead of what we're seeing our legislators putting forward. We've had here internally in the police department over the years, going back to the 1990s, we've had a town of West Hartford social workers embedded here at the police department at one time. We've had adult parole embedded here in the police department, as well as DCF workers embedded here in the police department. And very few agencies across the state that are our size or have been lucky enough to have state department personnel working within our police department. And that does help facilitate a resolution to a lot of the incidents and cases that we're working with. So again, nothing new. So the legislation that we're seeing it's something that we've stayed ahead and we're already complying with.
Thank you for that. The next thing in the bill is the creation of the Office of Inspector General. Basically, this office is going to be positioned within the Division of Criminal Justice, and they're going to be charged with investigating whenever a peace officer in performance of such officer's duties uses physical force upon another person, and such person dies as a result, thereof of a deadly force. So when an officer uses force and somebody dies as a result, they shall investigate it, and they will also prosecute if there's any wrongdoing. So that's the new office that was created. The next thing we're going to talk about is in the bill is the 1033 program, which is the military surplus equipment. This was, again, effective on passage. Departments will be prohibited from acquiring new, we shouldn't say new, it's probably used, but new equipment from the federal 1033 program. And there are 7 categories that we cannot acquire equipment from for law enforcement purposes. Did you want to talk about ours?
Yes, we've had the 1033 program. It's actually a very old program. It used to be called the North Star program. And even back in the 1980s, police departments were able to get supplies such as clothing, such as jackets, gloves, everything from medical equipment, generators, a lot of different things, not necessarily weapons and equipment that people would look at as more of a militaristic kind of equipment and things like that. So the program evolved into they call it the 1033 program, and it's surplus military, anything that the military wants to get rid of, and a lot of uses. We've been able to secure almost a brand new generator, which we keep down at DPW, and we didn't pay much at all for it. And we still have some excellent equipment, and we have had some rifles that had been acquired. However, we looked at them and they don't meet our needs, and those have, I believe they've already been returned back to the 1033 folks. So that concludes that.
The last part of that 1033 program is by no later than December 31st, 2020, we have to report our inventory of what we have left to the General Assembly. Now, all those took effect that I just discussed upon passage, effective October 1, this October. It limits the consent searches by police officers. And this is a new way of doing business. Basically, what it says is any search of a motor vehicle that was stopped solely for a motor vehicle violation, the officer cannot request consent from the operator to conduct a search of that vehicle. If they do a search, it has to be based on probable cause, or if they get unsolicited consent from the driver. What that means is basically if someone just says, go ahead and search my car without them requesting it, that's the only way they can do it now under consent, unless they have probable cause to do the search. Maybe an odor, if they see something in the car that builds probable cause to search it. So that's very important. It's a new way of doing business here in Connecticut. It also is the same for a pedestrian. You can't just stop a pedestrian anymore and ask them for consent to search them. It has to be based on either probable cause or, again, Terry versus Ohio. I hate to quote cases to you, but the only other time is if an officer feels that they have to pat someone down for their safety, if there's reasonable suspicion that that person has a weapon on them. Clearly, they can do that for their safety. But those are the only exceptions. Again, consent searches are out based on a motor vehicle stop. If they stop a vehicle or a person for a crime, which is a little another level, another standard above that, then clearly they can say, if it's a shoplifting, if it's a weapons violation, then it changes it. But alone, just say motor vehicle stop, can't do it. It's out, right? When stopping a motor vehicle, effective October 1, police officers in Connecticut can only ask for their license, registration, and insurance card. The only exceptions to that is if the person does not have a license or a valid ID, but they offer up something else to prove their identity, they can do that. But they would have to articulate that in the report. Again, you can't ask for other documents, and your business should only be with the driver. So that's a change effective October 1. A new one on the books is penalties for false reporting an incident or misusing the 911 system based on bigotry or bias. This has to do with a person or groups of persons who actually call the police to report an incident, but their motivation is based on the person's race, religion, ethnicity, disability, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression of such person or group. So basically, they're making the complaint essentially because of the way the person looks or the way they their background. That is a crime now if they do that solely for that reason. Use of force reporting, which is the next thing. Although this takes effect October 1, 2020, we've been doing this all along. We've been doing this for many, many years. Every time we use force. And again, let me make a distinction. What we consider force is any type of force that's beyond just simple handcuffing. If we go to handcuff someone and they pull away from us and we have to grab their arm, that's a use of force. So it's as simple as that. Anything that where they don't consent to handcuffing, all the way up through actually using one of a taser or something else. So we actually we report every single thing. And this says, basically agencies are required to maintain records detailing any incident where an officer discharges a firearm, except for training, uses physical force that is likely to cause serious injury or death of another person, engages in a vehicular pursuit. We've been reporting vehicle pursuits for many, many years. We do it monthly to the state. And again, although this lists serious uses of force, we report every use of force. That's what we've been doing, and we also review every use of force. All right. Not later than February 1st, 2021, agencies will electronically submit use of force reports to OPM for review. So that's still in the works. Again, some of these things have to be fleshed out as to how this is going to be done, whether it be through our next gen, which is our computer system we use, or some other way. A new one, security officers, believe it or not police officers, but any police officer who has then post-C certification canceled, revoked, or refused. So any police officer who loses their certification to be a police officer are ineligible to be a private security guard or security officer. Next, duty to intervene. So this came out July 31st, takes effect October 1st. Our rules and regulations, basically it's required conduct, which is our policy. Prior to this, we had that in place already. Our officers were trained that required conduct is a duty to intervene. They must intervene. It requires police officers and corrections officers to intervene in an attempt to stop another police officer from using force that the witnessing officer objectively knows is unreasonable. So unreasonable, excessive, or illegal. So we've had that on the books prior to this bill passed, and we will continue to keep it in our rules and regs, and we will review this annually. The next one, duty to report. Again, we had this in our rules prior to this bill, and it will continue to remain in there. Duty report requires police officers and corrections officers who witness or are otherwise aware of another officer using force that is unreasonable, excessive, or illegal are required to report such conduct to the force-using officer's agency. We have a requirement that you report it to a supervisor immediately. And again, they must intervene and they must report it as well up the chain of command. And the last one in this bill is retaliation prohibited. In our policy, again, prohibited conduct, which was in place before the bill, states that retaliation is prohibited. Agencies and officers are prohibited from retaliating against any officer who reports such conduct on the part of another officer. So those three we already have, and we train on them annually. The other part of this next one is Office of the Chief Medical Examiner will be conducting their own investigation to investigate deaths of individuals who die in custody of law enforcement or corrections. So that's a new addition. No quotas. We've never had quotas in West Hartford, nor will we. Again, effective October 1, 2020, departments are prohibited from imposing pedestrian citation quotas upon their officers. Some other PDs in other states may have been doing that, but we don't do that here. And again, the bill says that you cannot. Effective January 1st, 2021, which is a little different, they require every police officer to have a badge and name tag on the outermost garment that can be seen by the public. Here in West Hartford, that's just standard procedure. Everyone is dressed properly and they have their name tag and badge and other things on the uniform so anyone can see it. Again, we've been doing that. A new one, behavioral health assessments. Starting January 1st, 2021, officers must undergo a periodic behavioral health assessment. So they have to have a psych evaluation once every 5 years. This is, again, is going to be an unfunded mandate so far. Typically, it costs $450 per person for their hiring process to go and see a psychiatrist and be evaluated. Now we're going to have to do that once every 5 years for each officer in the agency for the mandate, which is going to be a pretty big ticket item. The problem we have with this so far, it doesn't say how lengthy the review has to be, how in-depth, how many hours. So that has to be fleshed out again by post to tell us what it is, what's acceptable and what's not. Typically, when you come in for to be hired, it could take as many as 8 hours, it could be 4 hours, 6 hours, it depends. And that's going to put a burden on us. And again, it's unfunded. Use of force changes effective April 1st, 2021. April 1st, 2021, this takes effect. Again, chokeholds or similar methods of restraint are limited to deadly force situations. That's been a policy here even before this bill, that it has to be a deadly force situation to resort to that. Other than that, they are prohibited. Under the bill, officers conduct must be objectively reasonable under circumstances after the officer has exhausted the reasonable alternatives to use of deadly force. So part of this bill is they're going to evaluate whether or not deadly force was applicable, and if the officer prior to using that force, if they exhausted any possible alternative prior to having to resort to that. Reason believes that the force employed creates no substantial risk of injury to a third person. So after they exhaust all of those possibilities, all the alternatives, they have to be certain that their use of force does not substantially risk injury to a third person or a bystander. So the officers now have to take their time and consider the other alternatives before they take that use of deadly force action. The bill has eliminated the justification for using deadly force in situations when the officer reasonably believes a person threatens infliction of serious physical injury in situations where making arrests. So, use of force can still be used, deadly force can still be used when it's necessary and when it's justified. However, it cannot be used in effecting an arrest or preventing escape of a person, which is a change in the law. And again, we're going to be training on that as required. It takes effect April 1st, 2021. The bill establishes factors that must be considered when determining whether an officer's use of force is objectively reasonable. Specifically, factors to consider include, number one, whether the person upon whom deadly force was used and possessed or appeared to possess a deadly weapon. So did they have a weapon, or did they appear to have a weapon before you used the force? Number two, police officers engage in reasonable de-escalation measures prior to using deadly force. Were there any steps we can use? Were there other tools that that we had? Could we use pepper spray or capstun, we call it? You can use your taser instead of going to deadly force. And did we de-escalate? Did we have an opportunity to de-escalate the situation? Or just, unfortunately, sometimes just simply by showing up on the scene, people see the police car and they see us in uniform. Sometimes there may be an unintended escalation, but we have to try to de-escalate as best as we can. And the last one is any conduct of a police officer led to an increased risk of an occurrence of the situation that precipitated the use of force. Did the officer, was there provocation? Did the officer cause the situation to excel to another level? If you remember the Wethersfield stop where the officer put himself in front of the vehicle and then used deadly force, they would consider that under this bill that probably would be a provocation. So we have to be careful that we don't provoke the situation based on this bill. Okay. Next, the big one is civil lawsuits against police officers. Okay. Qualified governmental immunity. So this one's been up for debate ever since it was passed. So effective July 1st, 2021, and for incidents that occurred July 1st, 2021 in the future, the bill has created a state law, civil cause of action against police officers who deprive individuals of equal protections or privileges and immunities of state laws as listed in Article 1st of the Connecticut Constitution. So Article 1st is their equivalent of the Fourth Amendment under the United States Constitution. There have always been a cause of action on the federal level under 42 U.S.C. 1983 for a violation of somebody's civil rights. You would go to federal court and sue the police officer, the employing entity for violation of the civil rights. Now this bill offers a state cause of action available to any plaintiffs Is it conceivable that someone will sue in Connecticut court and federal court? It's conceivable. This is new, so we're not sure how this is going to work out. Certainly, I'm sure someone's going to take advantage of this and sue on the state level. But this is new to the police officers. Something to keep in mind is if an officer, typically there's a lawsuit filed, and then the officer is represented by the town if they are within policy and within the law. And on the state level, if a town or the state represents the officer, and at the end of the day, they find out at the end of the trial, there's a judgment that's made or entered against the police officer, indicating that their conduct was malicious, wanton, or willful, then this bill requires that that police officer reimburse the town or the employer for the funds used to defend them. So they will be on their own for their own expenses. But again, it has to be, their conduct has to be malicious, wanton, or willful. Effective July 1st, 2022, here's a pretty expensive thing that we have to comply with, unless the law is amended by then. Dashboard cameras and body-worn cameras. Currently, we have dashboard cameras. They're WatchGuard. They're in our patrol vehicles. They're at their end of life. We're coming up to 9 years. 9 years, so they're at their end of life. This new requirement, effective July 1st, 2022, requires that in all of our patrol vehicles, we have dashboard cameras, as we do now, as well as body-worn cameras on the officers that are encountering the public. This is going to be an expensive undertaking. Currently, OPM is working to try to see if there's to give us grant opportunities for 30 to 50%. The money's not there yet. There's some leftovers from this previous grant years ago, but they have to fund that. We have currently 7 quotes. We're looking at, we're thinking the more efficient way of doing it is to have a dash camera and a body camera that are from the same vendor, basically, and maybe their storage is combined to reduce the cost. The bad news is, out of the 7 quotes, the average, if we were to store all of our data here, is $474,000 for a 5-year contract. If we were to use the vendor's storage capabilities, it's up to about $900,000 for 5 years. So this is a big ticket item. Currently, it's mandated by July 1st, 2022. Maybe there might be some changes in the law or some amendments, hopeful, or the money might be provided. But at this point, that's what we're facing. And the last thing, effective 2025, is the mandated CALIA accreditation. This is a national accreditation for law enforcement agencies. We have the Post Council state accreditation program as well. For some reason, they said that effective 2025 that you must have CALIA accreditation. That's a big ticket item as well. It's probably about, last I checked, about $30,000. And every time you have to renew this, once you get it, every 3 to 5 years, you have to I forget the number of years, you have to renew it. And that's another cost. We are currently, we started in January going through the state accreditation. We're halfway through tier 1 of the state accreditation. So along the way through COVID and everything else and through all of these other issues, we've been working on our accreditation. Financially, it's not been too bad because we had the electronic digital system, Power DMS, in place for 2 years now. And that's driving this. So we are actually sitting in a good position. And we'll continue to pursue our state accreditation. Hopefully they'll change this to any type of accreditation, whether it be state or national, and then we should do well with that. With all of that said, with the new bill, I just want to share with you that our boss, Chief Riddick, has already been engaged in participating in police initiatives for Connecticut. For those of you who aren't aware, he's currently a member of the Police Officer Standards and Training Council, our governing body, which develops directives for Connecticut police departments and officers. So he has some input as to where a lot of this goes. Hopefully hopefully it'll turn out well for us. The other thing is he's actually a member of the Connecticut Bar Association subcommittee charged with identifying recommendations related to improving this bill, and reporting to the Police Accountability Transparency Task Force. So that task force that they created, he's one of the people involved in that subcommittee. He is on there with former U.S. Attorney, a current assistant U.S. attorney and other police chiefs in Connecticut, a medical doctor, and other community members. So this group is hopefully going to be looking at this bill and some of our endeavors in the future and help carve out some of these things for us. That's it for me. If you have any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? This is a lot of information, Assistant Chief.
I saved you the 92 pages. Sorry.
No one has any questions at this time. And Matt, Mr. Hart, may I reach out to you? Did we know if Counselor Fave was ever able to get onto the call?
Matt Hart, Town Manager, she was not, Madam Chair, and she'll try to view the recording at a later point.
Okay. Okay, I see Deputy Mayor Davidoff, and the mayor does have a question. So Deputy Mayor Davidoff, why don't you let Mayor Cantor go first, and then you can follow.
Again, I apologize. I'm in a unique space and it's very echoey and loud, so I apologize for that. And I do want to just, again, say I am so grateful for the service of operations apparatus operator Joe Mangione and all that you all have been through the fire department. And our Assistant Chief, thank you so much for going through this. This has been this was a lot to digest and a lot to process, and we have to work on so much as we're going on, and things are going to change. We know they were. Some are going to be challenging to implement. Who's going to oversee it? How are they going to be enforced? All of, there's many practical questions. A lot of good and great intent, but again, practicality is going to be important, and there's really substantial costs associated with many of these items. As I'm adding, we could be looking at several $100,000 a year at least impact to the town. So. But we have, I know our next item is going through sort of our own internal action steps on what we're going to do. And so we're going to need to align those. And I don't want to go through everything right now, but I know the Citizens Review Board has been a very important issue for us, and we actually had started, the chief actually had talked to the town manager, had already started working on updating our Citizens Review Board. So this is a pretty general, I thought there was a more specific outline of what was going to happen with the Citizen Review Boards. Is there anything more than allowing that ordinance to happen and doing those steps? Is there any guidance along with any of this or no? I guess
Assistant Chief Terra, I would ask you to respond to that question. My understanding of the law is that the language is quite broad. It's discretionary. It allows towns to do this by ordinance. And as the mayor said, when we get to the next item, I'll talk about where we are in the research we've conducted to date. But Chief Terra, can you respond to the mayor?
Certainly. Mayor Cantor, when you read it, basically it says that the legislative body of the town may create a civilian review board. It still gives all the towns the opportunity whether they want to do it or not. But again, West Hartford, we've had it, and it says a lot about us here. This is the basics that you have to include in the policy that I just outlined. I've looked through it a couple times, but again, it just lists the scope. The scope is up to us. The number of members, again, it's up to us. Process of selection, the term of the office, and procedures for filing the vacancies. So what I've done in the past, I gave the town manager a copy of it. I had about 22 different versions from across the U.S. and compared it to what we were doing. And some of the, he just showed it. We looked at it, and we took the best for us, because of course we deserve the best here. So I looked at what we were doing in the past, and I made some recommendations to both Chief Riddick and to the town manager. and we're working on a draft right now. I believe that's going to be discussed later on with all of you and the town manager. I don't know if I answered that question for you.
You did. No, thank you. I was hoping that we would have a draft in the near future. And I know, again, this is a project that was started well before the police accountability bill was being discussed. So I appreciate that. I'm sure that much of this is going to come out of legal actions that are taken that are going to rule on certain things, because in discussions, I've been told that there are going to be some difficult legal implications. So, and what those are, we'll obviously have to keep abreast of. But again, I want to thank you putting it in a digestible form, things that we can process and digest further and ask questions about. I just would actually ask that we kind of keep this on the agenda maybe a little bit longer, a couple of times, so we can refer to it and ask questions if people have them as we go on. Because I think as we think about things and process them, we might say, how does this apply and how would this work? And you might not have the answers, but you may have a little insight by then. So who knows? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Thank you, Chairwoman Blanks. So I'm glad that we're going to keep this on the agenda, because there was a lot to digest, and it was presented very succinctly, so I do appreciate that. When you were discussing the part where it was talking about consent to search and things of that nature, I'm certain that there's going to be people who are not going to do it right come October, I think it was October 1st, and we're going to start seeing some case law, I figure, on that with respect to was somebody's constitutional rights violated, or did they violate a state law, or something to that effect. So I think that's going to be very, very fluid, I think, with respect, and it's going to be difficult to keep track of what the standard's going to be. But I'm certain that in West Hartford, we're probably training for what the October 1st law is, and then we'll just have to see what transpires from there. And then on the 1033 program, I think that's the number. It listed a bunch of items that we would not procure, but you mentioned a lot of items that were very useful to the town, such as a generator and other types of things that seemed like reasonable, that really were good procurements at reasonable cost. Are we no longer going to participate in the 1033 program? So that was my question there. And lastly, I think we're well positioned with Chief Riddick serving in his role on those three different boards or organizations to lend some insight. So, as things develop, I think we by having him there, we definitely have a front row seat for all these actions. And lastly, to the manager, what's your intent as to how we're going to evaluate all these various things as they go forward? Right now, we only have a third of the council on this meeting, and I'm certain that the others would probably want to know what's going on, since there's only a minority percentage of the members here. So just some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Davidoff. Matt, Mr. Hart, did you want to respond to any of that?
Yes, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your comments and your questions. So we're going to build in what we see as action items coming out of the legislature, out of the legislation, into our action plan. We are going to review that next on our agenda. I am conscious of the time, and I know you want to wrap up roughly by around 8:30 or so. So we'll try to make it concise as well. I do want to thank Assistant Chief Terra for doing an excellent job condensing the state law into something that's digestible. And what we see as a priority is an immediate priority is the item that the mayor touched on earlier, is a revision to our civilian review board. We are going to recommend that the council adopt one by ordinance. Right now it's established pursuant to departmental policy. So in a couple minutes, I'll talk about where we stand with that project.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I don't have any questions right now because I would really like to go through this and digest it a little more. But I do have a few comments, and my comments goes out to the PD and the leadership. I know you all do great work, and it's evident by your team in and around town. And I know as you begin to delve into this and look into it, you'll be very conscious of training and make sure that a number of these things are looked at carefully. Also, with our chief being very visible and receiving input from the number of committees that he's on, I think is really important as we look at how this is rolled out and being careful in terms of how it's rolled out as well. So I just wanted to offer my thanks for all the hard work that you all continue to do. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Hart, for item C under business items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. So we'll try to be expeditious with this, and I will ask Megan to load up the action plan on the screen. We also, as part of this, we're going to want to show you a short video that I think will be informative for you. Our departmental personnel did a very nice job with it, and I'll cue Megan up for that. So this is the action plan that we've shared with you previously. We're going to update it each month because we see it as a living document, and it's a good tool for you, and it's a good tool for us. And I'm just going to speak to this quickly. Item number 1, this is our community engagement effort. The chief and I have held 2 communications via WebEx. I thought it was a great opportunity to have conversation with members of the community. We also hosted it on Facebook Live, which is a really neat platform. The Noah Webster House has been working diligently on setting up a panel, and Chief Riddick and a couple of other police officers will be participating in that as well. The event, as we all know, was scheduled for the day that Storm Isaias hit us, so it had to be rescheduled, and still working to reschedule that. And Chief and I also talked about periodically convening a coffee house or a community conversation via Facebook Live and WebEx. We just found it to be a very, very useful tool and something we want to continue in the future. The next item, very, very critical, is taking a look at our existing use of force policies, revising them as necessary. Chief Terra talked about how we are leaders in that regard, and actually we're compliant with many aspects of the state law that just came out. But we are working to make sure that everything we do is in compliance with the new law. And Chief Terra, I think actually let's complete our review of this document, and then we will turn to the video, just in the interest of time. Item number 3 under the plan is we want to make sure that our departmental policies are available online. That's very important to us from a transparency perspective. We want those policies available to members of the public. And transparency, as we all know, helps to build trust. And we want trust between we feel as our police department and our community have a strong relationship, and this is part of maintaining it. So we've got a number of policies that we've posted online. We've got a new training video that we're going to show you when I'm done here. And after tonight's meeting, we're going to post that as well. If we could advance to the next slide, Megan, thank you. Item number 4, we've talked about this in the past as well. We've developed a report that includes, it's a use of force report, and it includes important data. The report has been in use for a little while now, and we are looking to update it further. I thought about presenting it to you tonight, but in the interest of time, I think we should do so at our next meeting. And then this report will also be published on a regular basis on the department's website and available for the public. Number 5, I want to spend a little bit more time on, and this is the Citizen Review Board that we've mentioned a few times already tonight. Chief Terra, really want to credit him again. He's done some excellent research. I think I showed the heavy-duty binder I have here. He's taken a look at 20 to 25 communities around the nation to look at how they've established their citizen review boards. And we are working on a draft ordinance that we'll be presenting to the committee at your meeting next month. Again, our present board is constituted under departmental policy. We are now going to recommend that you establish it pursuant to a town ordinance. We're going to recommend that you appoint, that the board be comprised of 9 members. Importantly, we are going to recommend that the board be constituted as a review board as opposed to an investigatory board. What does that mean? As a review board, they're going to be reviewing the work of our internal affairs division, both internal and external complaints that come in, how we've handled them. The review board will review them to determine whether or not they think they were done appropriately, whether or not any errors might have been made, etc. An investigatory board would have a different charge with subpoena power and basically would be handling the work that our internal affairs division handles right now. So we can talk in more detail when we present this regarding the policy distinctions between those 2 types of approaches, whether or not we're going to constitute this as an investigatory board or review board. Our strong recommendation, for a variety of reasons, will be that we establish it as a review board. So much more to come on that at your next meeting, but we are pretty far along in developing a draft ordinance for review by Corporation Counsel and then the committee. I imagine you're going to need a couple of meetings with it. It's probably going to be one of the most important things you do during this council term. I'm sure you're going to want a little time with it before you present it to the full council for consideration. Moving on to item number 6. This would be the body cameras, and Chief Terra and Chief Coppinger did talk about this earlier, that under the state law, this is not going to be an either-or approach. So we've had dash cameras in place for 9 years now. They've worked generally pretty well. We are in the process of piloting body cameras, but we're going to have to maintain both systems. Both systems are going to be required. It's not going to be an either-or type scenario. So body cameras will be new for us. We're going to select a product, and we will be drafting what's called a memorandum of understanding regarding their usage, and we'll be drafting that MOU, presenting it to our union, and working through any issues, any concerns they might have, and come to a final document that both parties would sign off on. Item number 7, we talked about earlier, the 1033, our federal equipment surplus program, that was also handled as pursuant under the new state legislation. We have been for some time now trying to return 19 rifles we received under this program to the military, and I believe our request is still pending. Next slide, please, Megan. And this is the last one in the plan right now. We talked earlier about the good work we're doing with human services on panhandling. There's certainly some other duties that our officers perform that arguably could be transferred to social services or human services. That may require, however, more resources for that office. You know, social services may need some additional resources. They likely will to do more of this work. And then last but certainly not least is continuing our long-term effort to enhance our minority hiring initiative. And a goal of ours is to better reflect our own demographics. That's generally how a local government or a police department would approach this. And Chief Riddick has talked in the past about the outreach we've performed to various members of the community, as well as the media that we've used to get the word out. You know, they're listed in the plan there. You see that fourth column. Specifically, we are focused on recruiting more people of Latina descent, as well as Asian Americans. They are severely underrepresented within the police force right now, and continuing our efforts to continue to recruit more Black and female candidates. So that is a very quick update on the action plan. Again, we want to update it and provide you with a copy just about every month, even if we don't speak to it. We want to make sure that you have a real-time document. And now, Madam Chair, I'd like to briefly show the video and then take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hart.
I don't think the audio is working, Megan. I think while she's working to reload that, I should have asked one of the assistant chiefs to just very quickly introduce the video.
Assistant Chief Terra here. What we did was, besides putting the policy out regarding the chokehold, reinforcing the fact that we only use those for deadly force situations, we actually went one step further and developed a video with the instructors, so that our personnel, not only they got the paperwork, but they also saw a video of what we are saying is prohibited under the new bill and what has been prohibited in our policies here all along. So that's what the video is. You have a defensive instructor up there demonstrating these moves that are prohibited.
The West Hartford Police Department's updated Deadly Force Policy Review.
Hello, I'm Officer Timothy Cameron from the West Hartford Police Department. I'm one of the defensive tactics instructors. I'm here to discuss the 2020 updated use of force policy adopted by the West Hartford Police Department. First, we want officers to know that the terminology has changed, but our techniques have not. West Hartford Police Department standards of training and our use of force have always characterized strangulations, chokes, neck restraints as lethal force. So again, the terminology has changed. The techniques that you have practiced and learned have not.
The new wording added to the West Hartford Police Department's Deadly Force Policy was provided by the Connecticut Police Officer Standards and Training Council's special program called CLESP. CLESP, or Compliance to Law Enforcement Standards and Practices, has provided the terminology utilized in the new Deadly Force Policy. CLESP describes the intentional use of chokeholds or other mentioned method of restraint applied to the neck area of another person as prohibited, except when deadly physical force is authorized. Again, all mentioned techniques described are only ones that apply to the neck area. This does not prohibit control holds of the limbs or body in use of force incidents. The following techniques are prohibited unless deadly force is necessary.
The West Hartford Police Department recognizes that use of force incidents are dynamic and stressful by their very nature. Mentally prepare yourself for these encounters where you will need to use force. Train diligently to improve your skills. Know the laws and policies pertaining to use of force. Seek out additional training in the use of force techniques whenever possible. Talk to any of the defensive tactics instructors or training officers to help find available courses. By increasing your training time, you will strengthen your skills and have the confidence to safely and lawfully perform in a use of force incident.
So, Madam Chair, Matt Hart, Town Manager, I want to thank the Assistant Chiefs for help putting together and leading tonight's presentation, as well as the officers who prepared that video. As you can see, it's a quality training tool, and we're going to make it available to the public at large via our website as well. Pause here and see if you have any questions as to where we stand on the items listed in the action plan.
Hi, this is Assistant Chief Coppinger with just one comment on the video.
You have it, Assistant Chief. Go ahead.
So on that video there, both of those officers, one officer, Tim Camerell, who was in the video, he is one of our defensive tactics instructors. And the other officer who was narrating it at the beginning and end is part of our professional standards unit. And I believe he has some defensive tactics training as well. Now, all our police officers were required to review that video and then sign off on that video that they viewed it and they understood what the procedures were. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarity, Assistant Chief. Mr. Hart, I'm sorry, were there any questions regarding the information that Mr. Hart just shared with us? No questions. Okay. I don't have any questions either, and I would just echo your comments on the great work that the PD continues to do and just look forward to more information as these things begin to roll out. Thank you again for your service. All right, any other questions? Because it brings us towards the end of the meeting, and I know it was rather long, but it was very informative and much needed. And I just, again, want to thank the entire public safety for all the work that you continue to do and putting West Hartford first and keeping all the town residents and businesses safe, where we feel we can continue to do the things that people who are free do, because freedom is not free. And I think we all need to keep that in mind. So if there isn't anything else, I would like to adjourn the meeting. Okay, thank you, everybody. Until the next time, be safe and please stay healthy and take care of yourselves and your loved ones.